Son a created being or uncreated, eternally in God, as God, that is. What brought this issue to a head was Arius, an Alexandrian priest accused falsely of holding that the divine Logos was a created being. He was only pointing out the absurdity of saying God was begotten by God. The Logos, i.e., the Logos, was begotten. The term begotten could only refer to the man Jesus as the Son, not to the uncreated Logos. After all, many biblical references to begotten were to biological generation, certainly not to God generating offspring. At any rate, this issue, who was the Son, erupted into the so-called Arian heresy that split the entire Christian church. So do not think for a second it makes no difference what one believes in this matter. On the contrary, we have two totally different Christologies, and one of them is wrong. The switch from Jesus as Son to God as Son. The outcome of this dispute was the most strategic and radical switches ever made in the history of Christianity and the understanding of Christ. For here on, all references to God's Son were to be solely to God, the uncreated Logos, the same Son begotten by God and later born of Mary. To make this understanding official was the purpose of the First Church Council, Nicaea 325. In one stroke, God, the Logos, became Son of God, and Jesus was God, Logos, in the flesh. Apart from his human appearance, Jesus was the eternal, uncreated Logos, one of God's triune modes of existence, omnipresent in all creation, and later called the second person of the Trinity. So now the Trinity is Father, Son, Spirit, or Father, Jesus, Spirit. Could anyone think of a more efficient way to divinize the man Jesus than to switch the created to the uncreated? Since Jesus knew nothing of the Trinity or Logos, his understanding of being God's Son was obviously not that of the council. The consequence of shifting Jesus' own understanding of Son of God to this being a reference to one of the Trinity had no good outcome. It gave rise to heated dissensions and animosities that seethed for centuries. Far from solving any Christological problem, the switch from a human son to God as a son threw Christianity off track of any true understanding of the Trinity and Christ. God never begot God. God was never born, suffered, and died. And the man Jesus was as completely human as any man who ever walked this earth. Stemming from the switch of Son from human to divine, the next wrong turn or major issue was how God's immanent essence or triune modes of existence could be referred to as two individuals, a father and a son. Clearly, anthropomorphic terms applied to God. But before we come to this, a major development that bears on this issue was the fathers affirming the Trinity ad intra as three hypostases in one God. The term hypostases was used to underscore the immanent essence of God's triune modes of existence, not only distinct ad extra, but immanently distinct ad intra. We're wading into some waters that very few of us have the background to understand, but just I don't know, let the words sink in. They will begin to make sense after a while because there is sufficient repetition. Division of the Trinity into three individual numerical ones. Many of the fathers were against referring to the Trinity as three hypostases. There was the fear lest these distinctions be understood as separate or individual entities or beings, i.e. tritheism. As we'll see, this fear was not unfounded, for as three individuals is just how they came to be understood. Also, while the fathers had no intention of making any division between God's one essence and its triune distinctions or modus operandi, still this too was another unfortunate outcome of speaking of God as three hypostases in one essence. Where three hypostases was to be understood as the immanent ad extra distinctions in God's one essence, now it was also to be understood as God ad extra external presentation, as three prosopa, or faces, or persons. These persons came to be understood as three individuals, three whats, three individual whos, that's what. As long as hypostasis is reference to the triune distinctions in one essence, no problem. But when understood as three particular individuals or numerical ones, there is no escaping tritheism. Philosophically speaking, every individual thing, a numerical one, is always a reference to some material or embodied thing, be it an individual atom, rock, plant, animal, or man. Given the multiplicity of individual things is why philosophers sought out the non-individual, the immaterial one that transcended all multiplicity, the one really underlying all individual things. This is why the Trinity, understood as three individual numerical ones, implies three embodied beings or entities, tritheism if not polytheism. Indeed, any understanding of the Trinity as three individual ones or three individual persons implies three beings, all protests to the contrary. Trinity divided into essence, nature, and persons, individuals. This is a heading. To make matters worse, the next understanding given hypostases by the Western Church was person. The excuse was that in Latin, hypostasis was Plato's meaning of substance, basically no different than the Greek hypostases. This, however, is not a believable excuse. Since hypostasis has had different uses in Greek, the Latins could have adopted the same Greek understanding. Yet, according to how some evidently regarded the Trinity, it came to be defined as three individual persons. By using the otherwise unheard of term person, they defined the Trinity as some people at least must have understood it. Thus, hypostasis was changed to mean an individual person, with all its human, anthropomorphic definitions, no less. Although person was said to be a property of nature, something nature or essence owned, well, that's a very, very fascinating idea to think about. Person, who you are, is owned by what you are, your body. Although person was said to be a property of nature, something nature or essence owned, it turns out person is the one who acts as the owner, agent of its own nature. So person does not refer to the essence or nature of either God or man. Rather, it refers to a property of the essence or nature of God and man. Right here we have a major divide between essence, nature, and person. While one may presuppose the other, yet nature, essence, and person are not one another. From here on, however, all references to God or man had to be constantly divided between whether one is speaking of the essence of God or man, or we're speaking of the person of God or man. Given this division between what God is, essence, and who God is, person, if one does not make absolutely clear whether his reference or her reference is to nature or to person, then he'd best say nothing at all. This division would be the genesis of mass confusion and the misrepresentation that promoted totally wrong understandings of the Trinity, Christ, and even the man Jesus. This is something that she will continue to harp on, and that if you don't understand, you won't understand anything that Bernadette says or writes, the difference between nature and person. Trinity as three individual self-identities, three I ams, three subjects, three whos. The definition and understanding of person was a reference to one's self-identity, to who one is. Person was regarded as the agent, the mover, the shaker of the nature or essence. It is the incommunicable subject, I am or self, that runs the whole show. This made the Trinity three individual self-identities, each its own independent agent and incommunicable subject, I am or self. This understanding of the Trinity is obvious